Welcome and thank you all for joining us to the Utah Heavy Industries Candidate Forum today. We're excited to hear how our candidates view the heavy industries in the state of Utah, and on behalf of the Utah Petroleum Association, my name is Ricky Rankel-Browning and I am the president of the association. UPA has been the voice of the state's oil and gas industry since 1958. With nearly 100 member companies that represent our upstream crude producers to midstream and transportation companies to downstream refiners and the range of professional service companies, we promote responsible development of Utah's vast natural resources and the manufacture of fuels that keep Utah families and businesses moving. Prior to COVID-19, the industry was a strong community partner and generous of its time and resources. Throughout the pandemic, at a time when even our own employees are struggling, we are meeting our commitments, and we will continue to do so on the other side of this very difficult moment in history. The impacts of COVID-19 have been felt in nearly every facet of daily life across America. The pandemic has disrupted Utah's economy and has raised concerns of potential vulnerabilities for Utah's energy supply. The allied industries of mining, oil and gas, construction, and manufacturing provide valuable revenue across the state. Our activity funds major state programs that improve the quality of life for many Utahns. And so now, more than at any time in our recent history, Utahns need to stand together and recognize that industry activity represents valuable family wage jobs and supports the backbone of the economic activity that Utahns depend upon and will pull us through this current challenging environment. And so with that, we're excited to hear our candidates' views of Utah heavy industry and what they can do to help us help state succeed. Thank you and welcome.
I'm Todd Bingham, President and CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association. Since 1905, we've been representing the manufacturing industry and providing opportunities for manufacturers in the state of Utah. We connect and strengthen Utah's makers, driving the economy in the state of Utah and providing opportunities for citizens and building communities. Over the last several weeks, we've been heavily involved with the coronavirus pandemic in manufacturing 1.5 million masks for a Mask for Every Utahn initiative provided by the state of Utah. This has been a critical component of flattening the curve for coronavirus in the state of Utah. We're very pleased to have been a part of this with over 20 manufacturers who've retooled and repurposed their facilities to help with this global pandemic in trying to get Utah's economy back moving and strengthening our state. As an organization, we're pleased to represent manufacturers across the state in a variety of different subsectors and industries, including aerospace, outdoor products, food manufacturing, and other heavy industries. Utah's heavy industry employs tens of thousands of Utahns in these high-skilled, high-wage jobs, and it contributes billions to Utah's GOP. They provide the raw materials, energy resources, manufactured products, and constructed environments that are the foundation for Utah's modern economy. As the fifth largest economy in Utah, manufacturers are pleased to be here and to participate in this event. Thank you.
Greetings from your friends here at the Associated General Contractors of Utah. My name is Rich Thorne. I'm the president and CEO of the AGC here, and we are grateful to be a part of this gubernatorial forum that has been pulled together by organizations representing heavy industry. AGC of Utah is celebrating our 98th year of service to Utah's construction industry. Our membership includes just under 600 firms that do the majority of non-residential work in the state, and we are just grateful to be a part of this great industry and part of this organizational effort today to learn more about these gubernatorial candidates and who may be Utah's future leaders in state government. Thanks again, appreciate all you do, and we look forward to hearing from the candidates.
I'm Joey Gilbert, Vice President of the Associated General Contractors of Utah. Utah's heavy industries are also classified as critical infrastructure industries, meaning that the goods and services we provide must continue uninterrupted, even in a time of economic disruption like we have seen with the coronavirus pandemic. During these challenging times, workers in Utah's heavy industries have stayed on the job to provide power and fuel, continue critical manufacture of PPE and medical equipment, to maintain our transportation infrastructure and more.
I'm Brian Summers, President of the Utah Mining Association. The Utah Mining Association was founded in 1915 and represents Utah's mine operators and service companies that support the mining industry. Mining is a foundational industry in Utah. Since the first mineral deposits were discovered in the 1850s to the present, Utah's mining industry has been at the forefront of the state's economic development. Utah's modern mining industry uses cutting-edge technologies and a highly skilled workforce to extract mineral resources in an environmentally responsible way. The mining industry pays the highest average wages of any industry in the state, and mining operations are some of the largest private employers in much of rural Utah. Despite the fact that every Utahn relies upon the resources, products, and services provided by Utah's heavy industries, and despite their massive contribution to Utah's economy, heavy industries are often overlooked in public policy debates and during political campaigns. For that reason, the Utah Mining Association, Utah Petroleum Association, Utah Manufacturers Association, and the Associated General Contractors of Utah asked that the 4 Republican gubernatorial candidates give us their take on policy issues related to Utah's heavy industries and outline their plans to support them. Each of the candidates, Spencer Cox, Greg Hughes, Jon Huntsman, and Thomas Wright, came to Wheeler Machinery, a homegrown company that has been supporting Utah's heavy industries for over 90 years, to be interviewed. Up next, you'll find their answers to 6 questions that we asked of all the candidates and 2 individualized questions for each. We hope that you'll find their answers enlightening and that this will help you make decisions as to whom to support with your vote. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
So, during the gubernatorial campaign and in discussions about recovering from the coronavirus downturn, there's been a lot of talk about rural economic development. However, very little has been said about plans to support traditional industries in rural Utah like oil, gas, mining, manufacturing, and construction, despite the fact that these industries generally pay the highest average wages in rural Utah. So why do you think we have this disconnect, and what are your plans to support these traditional industries in rural Utah if you're elected?
Well, the disconnect that we hear so often really it's just a demographic disconnect. When you have 85 to 90% of the state that lives in a very small area, those of us that live outside of the Wasatch Front are often left behind and forgotten. And it's also, look, everybody gets excited by the new thing, the new innovation, the next thing, right? So we end up spending a lot of time talking about the technology companies in the state that are doing amazing things, and I don't want to take away from them at all. Mm-hmm. But as somebody who lives in rural Utah, I can tell you without doubt that it's extractive industries, mm-hmm. It's oil, gas, and mining that pay the bills for rural Utah. That's where the best jobs, those that are able to raise a family, are working in those industries. I do believe, and I've talked about this, that we are going to see a manufacturing renaissance in our country, and I believe that rural Utah is very well situated to take advantage of that manufacturing renaissance. We have amazing employees, we have space, we have the land, we have the water, we have the power, we have the things that we need to be successful in those industries, and I'm excited for what the next few years hold for rural Utah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest that our campaign, our ticket, and our message has not ignored it. In fact, when we've traveled around the state, we do have great industries existing right now in manufacturing, in our extraction industries, in agriculture. There's barriers to markets. Our play, and as governor, we're going to look at an infrastructure play of rail, water, roads, fiber optics, that infrastructure that allows for those existing industries and economic sectors we have to lower those barriers. I'm real bullish on our inland port, a system, not one, not just one place in the state. Thanks to the Intercontinental Railroad, Utah is connected to every coastal port from Seattle all the way down to Long Beach, Los Angeles, and everything in between. If those rails are coming into the state of Utah somewhere, you could have regions of U.S. custom bonded ports. That means agriculture, hay, alfalfa, beef, pork, chicken can get to the Asian Rim and to overseas markets. Manufacturing, they're drawn around inland ports. It's coastal ports as well as inland ports. Inland ports exist all over the country, or all over the world and our country, and it's just a logistics solution. If you have bottlenecks at the port, you have rail that comes from those ports, and you can have the bonded customs of the respective country do the inspection and either distribute out to their country or stamp, inspect, and send the final delivery. Utah's been studying this since 1978 because it's always made sense that we have an inland port or a system of ports. I think that the industries that we're talking about today are enhanced because it's not professional services. You can't just say telecommuting and online connectivity is going to solve or that we would even want those jobs to be the only jobs, because that's professional services, of which rural Utah has, as you've pointed out, a lot more to offer, and does a lot more than just professional services.
Well, thanks for having me. We probably have a disconnect because most people don't know squat about any of those industries. You know, most people, I mean, it's true, but you know, most people running for office say know very little about it. So what would inform them to be able to speak at all coherently about what we should do? So if you look at our base, if you break down our state's GDP, something I want to double over the next 10 years, and I think that's totally doable, manufacturing is probably a $20 billion portion. Let's just take it at that, you know, with 130,000 jobs and high compensation rates that would be higher than many other industries. And I think people probably take for granted those industries that are cyclical, but here year in and year out. So they're always going to be here. But I don't believe that's the case. I think if we don't tend to and nurture our basic manufacturing, which would include gas, oil, and mining, you don't have the building blocks for adding value in the economic chain that makes our economy viable. So any economy can't survive on services alone. You have to make something. And one of my concerns here in Utah is we don't make enough stuff. We don't have heavy manufacturing I'd love to bring in heavy manufacturing. I worked on a manufacturing initiative before when I was governor. And if you look at the numbers coming out of 2007, 2008, look at the spike in basic manufacturing in the state, and it went from, I don't know, $8 or $9 billion up to maybe $15 billion, because our fundamentals were right on taxes, which we changed, on regulation, and the idea that we were inviting capital into the state like never before. And if you invite capital into a state, it's going to migrate, you know, some's going to go to technology, which is 20% of our economic base, but a good part of it's going to go to manufacturing, because we have in our state, we're blessed with all the natural resources that we need to begin the economic chain of manufacturing, and therefore value added economics. And if we forget that, then we forget the basics of economic growth and development.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. In this campaign, I've often thought this. There's been such a heavy push toward diversification of the economies that sometimes it's easy to take for granted what's already there and what the economic drivers are in some of these areas. And I know in the Uinta Basin and in Price and in other areas that I've been in around the state, as I've met with citizens and the workforce and people there, they understand that these industries are the core industries in that area, and that they will continue to be the core industries, and that they need to be supported. And so I think in this campaign, diversification has been a big push, because I think rural communities recognize that in some cases, you know, if they're reliant on coal, they could be one president away from really being hurt on, you know, on that. And so they want to diversify their economies, but I don't think they take for granted the core industries that are there, what's built their local economies, what's employing their people. But I think as candidates, we have had probably more discussion on how to diversify those economies if they're reliant on one or maybe just a couple of things, and maybe a little less on how to expand the core economies that are there. And that has come up in a couple campaign stops that I have been on. It didn't come up in either of the rural debates, but it needs to be a topic of conversation, because there's challenges associated with these industries. But these industries, the ones you mentioned, are the ones that are driving those local economies.
So whenever we have a red air day here on the Wasatch Front, there are inevitably calls to more heavily regulate industrial emissions, despite the fact that these point sources are only about 17% of total emissions on the Wasatch Front. So for example, together all of the refineries around Salt Lake City only make up about 3% of emissions, and further incremental improvements are often really, really expensive. So what would be your approach as governor to educate the public on industrial versus area and mobile emissions?
So it's always easier for the public to point to someone else being the problem. As governor, I'm just going to be very blunt about it. Tailpipes. Tailpipes are the largest contributor of air quality or bad air quality. And so I went to this, it was a UCARE conference, banquet, and they asked us questions. And I don't mind uncomfortable conversations, and this was one of them. You had a candidate that said zero emissions in Salt Lake County zero net emissions by 2030. I think that's even more radical than California is trying to do right now. what I've told everyone is, look, if you live in a valley and you keep seeing it grow and populate, you can't sprawl like Dallas-Fort Worth. It just keeps getting more congested. You can't shoehorn in all of the population growth and economic development into a 130-mile, 4-county Wasatch Front and expect your air to be cleaner. We're doing good things on those fronts, like Tier 3 fuel, and the refineries have been a major partner in making sure that we're refining Tier 3 fuel in Utah. But the play is that we have to see economic growth throughout the whole state. As we do that, you're not shoehorning it into a valley where the tailpipe emissions and the population growth can contribute to the bad air. Now we're seeing economic opportunities. Young people don't feel like they have to leave their communities. My kids who are becoming that emerging workforce, they don't have to leave the state of Utah if the cost of living is too high and the quality of life is low. They can find other places in the state that they can make a life and find their way. So how we deal with it, we let the public know what is causing the clean air challenges. And the solution is really that we see economic prosperity throughout the state. You have at least, out of 29 counties, 4 counties being the Wasatch Front, 80% of Utah's population living in just those 4 counties. There are minimally 22 counties that have never seen a day of economic opportunity. Their communities continue to shrink. The Hughes and Iverson administration, we're going to put our state bonding authority and infrastructure mission is going to be to bring infrastructure to those areas, so finally they don't shrink. They can grow, and that's going to improve our area along the Wasatch Front as we see that growth happen more uniformly for the whole state.
Well, let's just be smart about the facts. What are tailpipe? What are vehicular emissions? What are source emissions? You can break it down specifically. So what happens during COVID-19? We have fewer cars on the road. Naturally, the air quality index, the PM 2.5 numbers are going to change. They're going to go down. So you know exactly where the future takes us. It's not rocket science. It's going to take us toward cleaner engines, which is what Caterpillar is doing better than anybody in the world, or a Ford Motor Company, a company whose board I sat on for many years. I know it extremely well. They're introducing the F-150 next year as an all-electric. They introduced the Mustang this year as the all-electric. So increasingly technology and those who are the big OEMs, the big manufacturers, are going to take us toward cleaner engines, and that's going to mean a lot in terms of air quality. So in many ways, the challenges we've traditionally faced are going to be addressed through the march and the advance of technology in manufacturing.
Yeah, well, mobile emission is number one. I mean, it is about 50%. And I've said in this campaign multiple times that I don't believe in government compulsion. I think people will do the right thing. They will take the steps necessary to reduce their mobile emissions if they understand how to do that. And I've talked about them in this campaign. We had a great event with UCare. I've also had the chance to meet with Rio Tinto and other manufacturing facilities along the Wasatch Front, refineries. I've met with some of their representatives. There's 2 things that will happen. One, as we reduce mobile emissions, our homes and office buildings will become the biggest emitters. And that should be our goal, is to drive mobile emissions down so much that the next project, so to speak, is our buildings and our homes. But we should be doing those 2 things simultaneously. We should be having the discussion about mobile devices and driving that down by having people make informed decisions. And our citizens will make informed decisions when they understand. When you're talking about cold starts and trip chaining, and people understand that 60 to 90% of their emissions happen when they first turn on their car, it starts to change people's mindsets, right? I had a conversation with somebody who told me that he went to church and counted 60 or 70 cars that drove less than 2 blocks. That's 60 or 70 cold starts. So we need to address the mobile while simultaneously addressing the construction of new homes and the appliances we put in them by educating people, not by compelling them. I don't believe in that. People will do the right thing if they have the right information, but part of that conversation needs to be the misconception that the number one source isn't mobile or homes/office buildings, that it's industry. Because a lot of times, and I have heard people say it, they think it's the refineries or the manufacturing facilities, when in fact those are not the top 2 items. So I think that's just a part of the overall conversation to make sure that we're educating citizens and that they understand the data and that they recognize that everybody's doing their part to drive down the particulate matter to clean up our air?
Well, that's the key. It's education, and it's something I've been doing. It's something I've been doing on this campaign. Everywhere I go, I get these questions. What is your plan for those red air days? What is your plan for bad air? And they're always amazed when you just lay out the facts. And these aren't my facts. Everyone agrees with these. Even the Salt Lake Tribune reported these things, that our air is 30% cleaner now than it was just 10 years ago. And most of that, in fact, almost all of that is on the backs of industry. That's where we have made hundreds of millions of dollars of investment cleaning up our air. It has almost all come from industry. They're often very surprised to learn that half of the bad air comes from tailpipes. So if we want to clean up our air, we should look at, where can we have the biggest bang for our buck, and that is right now with tailpipes. And part of that is because of our refineries are now producing Tier 3 gasoline. 3 of them, I think we have 2 that are scaling up to do that now. That's going to do more to clean up our air than anything else that we can do. So we have to educate the public on what makes a difference. The other thing that we're learning right now is that when people work from home, they don't pollute as much. And so there is a bill out there that we're working on with a senator to have businesses designate employees who can work from home on red air days as a way to clean that up. It shouldn't all be borne on the back of heavy industry, who have already done more than anything else to clean up our air.
Thank you. So heavy industries in Utah struggle to find a qualified and trained workforce. So there have been a number of changing trends that have combined to cripple what was once a robust education pipeline for industrial workers. And those factors include the dismantling of public vocational and technical education programs, declining participation in apprenticeship training, and an increasing focus on college preparatory programs at the high school level. So how do you view these workforce challenges, and what are your ideas on how to address each of them?
Well, if manufacturing is going to be a big part of our base, as it should be, and as it should increasingly be over time, because I'd like to manufacture more. I want to ask the fundamental question, why aren't we making cars here? Why aren't we making airplanes? I'll go talk to my friend David Calhoun, CEO of Boeing, and I'll ask him that, why in other landlocked states can you manufacture things that we're not manufacturing here? Well, a lot of it's because we don't have access to export facilities, which we need. And an inland port will address some of that. We've got rail and road and air, which are all important. But let's just say that manufacturing is an ever-growing part of our base, our state's GDP. That then means we're going to have to introduce the basics of manufacturing at an earlier stage in education, which means into public schools, into high schools. So technology is introduced, finance is introduced. Are we doing enough in terms of introducing our young kids to manufacturing? And are we integrating our high school programs into our UCATs? Well, according to the UCAT leaders who I have met, the answer is not enough. So I think that collaboration between the apprenticeships and the programs that would lead to higher skills in manufacturing to support a larger manufacturing base, I think are all necessary. But we're also going to have to look at our UCATs and say, what are they teaching? And do we need to revamp and update the curricula that all of them are following to accommodate more manufacturing? So we'll have a big chunk technology. We'll have a big chunk, equal chunk, 20% at least today of our GDP, which is agriculture. And I hope we get a bigger chunk in manufacturing because, again, to me, that's my background. That's what I know best. And that's where value added comes from in any economy. And our workforce will have to match our aspirations. So we're going to have to look at UCAT and look at the curricula. Are we focused enough on manufacturing, on the basics of manufacturing? Probably not. Are they integrated enough into our public school systems to introduce concepts of manufacturing, vocations, and skill sets that young people might find an interest in? Probably not. So those are things that we're going to have to work on. But again, you never reach the promised land when it comes to training. You do your best, and then you have a new wave of what I hope will be manufacturing, and you'll have to retool accordingly to make sure your economy is prepared for that. I did that as governor before, and we saw the results. You get your taxes right, you get the regulatory environment right, you get the training right, you get the relationships with higher ed and public ed right, and there's nothing you can't do. I mean, this state is situated where dream big, sky's the limit, and go for it. And we're not inhibited by much, just our own imaginations.
Yeah, see, these workforce challenges are one of our greatest opportunities. I love talking about this because we are the best state in the greatest country the world's ever known. And the reason is not our government. The reason is our people. Our people are innovative, they're hardworking, they're self-sufficient. They just love to work and they work hard. They're honest, good people that we have here in the state of Utah. We have a disconnect between pathways to the workforce and our higher education system. I've been on the State Board of Regents. I've been on the Dixie State Board of Trustees. I uniquely understand those systems of higher education, and I understand how hard it is for them to create those pathways. One of the things that I would like to see done, and I haven't seen this in state government, is I would like to identify those career pathways in a very defined way and inspire high school kids as well as people that have filed for unemployment. We now have 200,000 people that have filed for unemployment to identify career pathways that they can be reskilled and retrained for. Those opportunities are there, just people don't always know that they exist. So we've got to have a better way of communicating. What once in our high schools, because you brought up the high schools, we had counselors that helped with that. We've now seen an influx of a mental health challenge that's beyond proportion in the state of Utah. I mean, we are #1 in the country for teenage suicide. So nothing's more important than the mental health of a high school student, right? So we've lost part of the focus of career pathways and vocational and technical training and merging our systems of higher education with those students at the high school level. And so we've got to come up with a plan. But the first thing we have to do is we have to understand where the shortages are and where the needs are. I have spoken to frustrated business owners all over the state that need more machinists. They need more technical skilled workers. And one just recently told me he's opening a plant or expanding his plant in Texas because he doesn't feel like he can find that workforce here. So while the state of Utah has been incentivizing with large economic incentives other companies to come into the state, we've been missing the opportunity to help the businesses that are already here expand and grow by training the workforce to be what they need to expand. And I'm sure that that's the case with a lot of the businesses that you represent in your associations. So I want to be really specific about this. I want to sit down with those industries, those leaders, and any business owner that wants to have a seat at the table and really have a detailed strategic plan and understanding of what career pathways exist, where we're short, why we're short, and how do we correct that problem in our technical colleges, in vocational training, as well as our system of higher education. And once we understand what the challenge is, it'll be a lot easier to address it. But I just feel like right now there's a little bit of a disconnect. And a governor that has that leadership desire to sit those people down and to retrain and reskill the workforce is going to have a lot of success in doing that. And you know, my 3 opponents have been in for 16 plus years, and that has yet to happen, despite me being on the Board of Regents and really pushing for that. So I'm really passionate about it, and it's something that I would do.
So if it wasn't for the coronavirus and the past 3 months, this is what you would have heard me talking about. In fact, it's a major part of our campaign platform, is this concept that we have separated education from work for far too long in our state. You're exactly right. They used to be seen as supporting each other. They were one and the same, education and work. You didn't know where one ended and the other began. And over time, we've separated those two things. We've also made this culture where this idea that every kid needs a bachelor's degree, which is bad for our kids and it's bad for our economy. And so we need to change that atmosphere. And we do that by reinvesting in the things that matter, in vocational education, in our trade and technical institutions. And so we've proposed a significant upgrade and a significant increase when it comes to funding. But there's something else that has to take place, and that is that all of our institutions of post-secondary education need to start collaborating with employers in the state when it comes to designing curriculum, helping to understand what the marketplace is demanding. I had a friend that retired recently who said that he had all of the knowledge he needed for the first 30 years of his career when he graduated from college. Now, that will never happen again. We're routinely graduating people who don't have the knowledge they need for the first year of their career because we've disconnected education and employment. Getting back to that, by the way, that will do more to increase economic development in our state than anything else, because companies, when they're looking to locate, when they're looking to expand, they're looking for a workforce, and we, more than an incentive, it's about workforce, and we can deliver that here.
Thank you.
So I'd say quickly, we have to change that trend right away. What you get in me as a governor, I'm a pioneer. I'm the pioneer in my family. I came across the plains in my Suzuki Samurai, and not a handcart, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I'm a bellhop in the '80s at the Sheraton. I'm working. Where I grew up in a blue-collar town, there was dignity in work, and it was all work. I also saw people that were losing their jobs. We saw the manufacturing sector in the United States, and particularly hitting Pittsburgh. I saw the consequence of that. In the Obama years, in his administration, I kept hearing there are jobs that Americans won't do. It's condescending, it's belittling, and it created with our young people, our emerging workforce, that everyone had to go to college if they were going to amount to anything. It's false. I've seen it with my own eyes, what a strong and robust manufacturing sector is. As I grew up, I saw what happens when you lose it. And our play is, as I've described, the manufacturing. If we know because of this virus that we want to be more self-reliant, we want to see these industries and these jobs in China and other places come to the United States. Utah, for manufacturing and a growing manufacturing sector, nobody has the rail infrastructure, the road infrastructure. I-15 starts in Alaska, goes through Canada, Western United States, Mexico, 3 countries, I-80, across the country, I-70. If we're going to have a manufacturing sector in the United States, which we will when we need to have it, this is the state that is best prepared to do it. We're a young state. That means that these young people we have to change that paradigm back to there is dignity in work and there are opportunities to support your family and enjoy the American dream. And so that has to happen. We have to change that, and I think that our administration is best positioned to do it. My understanding of that role in our country and how we've lost it and how we move forward. So we need to look at, and by the way, when we have good manufacturers come into our state, as we saw with Stadler Rail, they start pushing how do we prepare workforce. They become the opinion leaders that show us how to get young people ready for the workforce. And again, it's not just higher ed. That turf, and there's a turf war politically with that. I've watched it, I've lived it. We're going to see manufacturing sector, and as we grow that sector of our economy, the answers of how to get our young people ready will come, and we just have to, you have to have a governor that identifies it and takes advantage of it.
Thank you. So Utah's heavy industries not only produce much of the energy on which Utahns rely, they're also some of the largest power users in the state. So Utah currently has the 7th lowest power prices in the nation, and we've been a net energy exporter since the 1980s, although that status is now being threatened. So what would you do as governor to keep energy prices low and to ensure that Utah continues to be energy independent as a state?
Yeah, so
well, we've got to continue to invest in infrastructure, right? I mean, the reason Utah succeeded on a lot of these fronts, including this one, is the investments that we made before. The people that went before us and the leaders that went before us were smart. They were investing in infrastructure ahead of the demand and ahead of the need. What we see in a lot of states that are really struggling is they fall behind on the infrastructure. And when you fall behind on the infrastructure, it's really hard to catch up, and it has dramatic impacts on the economy. So when it comes to energy independence, we need to continue to invest in that infrastructure, whether it's building a rail line, in Uinta County to help export, that high waxy crude oil to the Gulf Coast so that they can compete. They don't have to just sell to the refineries along the Wasatch Front, and which really limits their ability to compete. We've got to invest in the infrastructure to allow Utah companies to not only create the energy here for Utahns, but then be able to export it to places where they can sell it and compete in a global marketplace. So I'm not a big government guy, as you know. I'm very conservative, but I believe that one of the proper roles of government is to look at infrastructure and build infrastructure for tomorrow that has a significant return on investment to its citizens. And I think when it comes to energy, we're starting to fall behind on that infrastructure. And I have a whole notebook of notes from people all over the state that have talked to me about very specific ways that we can continue to have that energy independence that you described. And Utah should continue to be on the forefront of that.
First of all, when we talk about our exploding economy, this part always gets left out for some reason. But I firmly believe that our low power prices have as much to do with our economic success over the past 20 years as anything else that we talk about. And so we can't lose that competitive advantage. And there's some things that we have to do. One of the challenges that we have is that a lot of the energy development in our state is done on federal lands. And when capital is tight, if companies have to choose, they're going to choose North Dakota or the Balkans or somewhere else where you have more regulatory certainty. You don't have to jump through all the federal hoops. And so one of the things that we have to continue to work on is with our federal partners to make sure that there is certainty within these lands, and that we aren't adding unnecessary and undue burdens and expenses that make it so that we are not competitive with other states. And that's something that in our administration we will continue to work through. It should not take 7 years to get a permit. That's just ridiculous. It's unsustainable. But we can also make sure that Utah is not adding to that problem, making sure that our regulatory scheme, while important, is not overly burdensome or not taking more time than is absolutely necessary. And those are the things that we can control and will under my administration.
Thank you.
So we have all, as you've just pointed out, we can be energy independent because we are so rich in resources. That's the oil, the gas, the coal. The crazy irony that we're living through right now, and the strange times that we're in, is if we do care about clean air, and we do, and we care about being good stewards of our environment, which we all do. If you have coal that is the lowest sulfur, highest BTU burning coal, maybe in the world, cleaner than what Australia is mining right now and Indonesia is, and you see new coal-fired power plants that are being built in real time right now, it makes all the sense in the world. In fact, I don't know that Utah's energy sector could even come close to the demand that's out there globally and on the Asian Rim for clean, low sulfur, high burning BTU coal. We have to get that to market. Our waxy crude, low, almost non-existent sulfur. It could be a blend stock for cleaner fuel and emissions, for lower emissions. So we have solutions in our extraction industry, not only to have a more robust export or get to the Gulf so we can have it as a blend stock there for the black and yellow waxy crude. It's the answer that everyone's looking for to make sure emissions are low, but it'll just put the economy in such a stronger place. But we have this political movement towards getting away from fossil fuels, getting away from those things. It's a bubble. You could do it in the United States all day long, and this is why we're becoming less of an exporter or less of even using it within our own state. It's a political argument, not a practical one, not one I even believe. I keep hearing that the science is that you can't. Let's do that. Let's look at that, because I'm going to tell you that Utah's natural resources are the cleanest and most marketable in the world, and we just have to push against the rhetoric we hear out of California, the new Green Deal in Washington, even candidates in this race that say zero net emissions by whatever year. We will lose these advantages that the state has by trying to look at some of these alternative energies. I'm not against alternative energies, but they have a place, and the place is not to take over our energy resources we have that make our economy strong and really we rely on as a state.
Well, I learned as a leader at Chevron Corporation, which is one of the largest integrated energy companies in the world, that our future is limitless when it comes to gas and oil and the way we discover and the way we extract and the way we refine. Now, so technology is taking us in areas where all of that is going to be part of our future, more so than past, because we're lucky enough to have a state with a lot of natural resources, and now technology allows us to do it better, faster, smarter, cheaper, cleaner. We're limited by our distribution capabilities. So why in the basin, for example, where unemployment is 30 or 35%, are we stuck? It's not because our hydrocarbons are less viable. It's you get more of a paraffin waxy product that comes out of the area that not every refinery can crack. Chevron's refinery can in North Salt Lake, and you've got pipelines that make that possible. But you need more in the way of outlets to other options in the Gulf Coast, for example. So we're going to have to look at our network of pipelines, which is not really a state issue, that's more of a private sector issue, but then look at how we're able to get product to the next phase of value-added refineries. And I think we're limited in some of our abilities there. And that's where, again, something like the inland port will allow us access to end users and to markets that today are really hard to reach. So looking at, thank goodness we have the natural resources, because a lot of states don't. Thank goodness we have the technologies increasingly that allow us to access it. When prices are low, like they are today, Sometimes it's, for a while, it's less viable, and we're facing one of those crunch moments, and that's more of a big kind of a OPEC macroeconomic play between the Russians and the Saudis. But they can't play that game for very long because their economies are dependent upon break-even prices per barrel of oil. That can't be sustained at this level. So prices are going to go up, and as they go up, we'll be more and more competitive. It's distribution, transportation, access, and I think relationships with some of the independents who we need more of in the state, who maybe haven't been introduced to opportunities here. But as more and more technology advances, we have more and more product that is accessible in an environmentally friendly and clean way. And so our future in the energy sector, I think, particularly as it relates to gas, because natural gas going forward will transform our nation's economy, and our state should be a major provider. So manufacturing economics based on natural gas versus other feedstocks is preferable. And when you look at natural gas prices versus what they are in Asia or Europe, even though the Russians try to get everybody addicted to their cheap gas, we are in a really good place longer term as it relates to particularly natural gas, which is more and more what the state has come to rely upon if you look at the mix between all the above. Coal and natural gas, for example. So I'm an optimist when it comes to our longer term play. Right now we're being crunched by prices and the geopolitical games that are being played, and we're being crunched by COVID, which is economically, it's a huge problem. But that will come to an end when a vaccine is available in a few months. And then it will be, how quickly can we get out of the hole we're in? And I think energy will lead whatever kind of recovery we have. It always does.
The international export of many of Utah's bulk commodities is being threatened by coastal states who have blocked port construction or port access. What would you do as governor to ensure that interstate commerce isn't impeded and that export markets are not blocked for Utah's oil, liquid natural gas, coal, ores, and other commodities?
Well, we just have to be aggressive when it comes to protecting our rights as a state. And as a state, we need to participate with industry in making sure that those supply chains are left open. It's just unconstitutional. It's a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause. We have to make sure that we are protecting the constitutional rights as a state and of our companies to do business across state lines. And what's happening is they're trying to regulate businesses in the state of Utah by using these unfair and unnecessary burdens and roadblocks that they're placing in our way. And that's, again, it was expressly prohibited in the Constitution, and so it's our job to push back in using any forum that we need to, but usually that means litigation, and we should be involved in that.
So my last year as speaker, I fought very hard to create our Utah Inland Port Authority. It has a board now. They just hired a gentleman from the Long Beach Port to be the executive director. His name's Jack Hedge, smart guy. He's been all over the state looking at where these inland U.S. custom bonded ports, a system of them statewide, could be, where we could have them regionally. I asked him, I don't want to lie to people, but I don't have time for blue ribbon panels and 2030 objectives. My commitment to the voters, and I've been saying this on the campaign trail, is by 24 months of a 4-year term, we'll have a first of a system of U.S. custom bonded ports operable in the state of Utah. That's how you get past the states that are trying to keep us from their coastal ports. Have it inspected, have it stamped, have it authorized for final delivery by our U.S. Customs Authority. The states can't stop that. It's interstate commerce, it's trade, and that's how we overcome that barrier, by the inland port system.
Thank you.
Pick an export site that wants to do business with us. There are a lot of them. And it's all based on the cost and the pricing of transportation, because per mile it's a little different whether you're going to California or the Gulf Coast. But I think those economics will change as well. So we're always going to fight those battles with California. And that shouldn't deter us, because there are other export sites and export capabilities that we can access, particularly with an inland port. I think that provides way more in the way of outlets that we can access and look to get our products to market. So I'm not put off by what happens in California, because that was totally predictable.
Yeah, we've talked about this, and this did come up in one of our rural debates. This is a situation where we have to have kind of a multi-pronged approach. First and foremost is we have to make sure that we have a strong presence with the federal government when the federal government's overreaching and making it difficult for us to do business, right? The federal government has a tendency to do that, and we need to make sure that we have an executive branch that understands how to navigate that bureaucracy and the red tape and all of the regulation that they throw at these industries. And that's why I chose Congressman Bishop as my running mate. He has more experience with the federal government than maybe all the gubernatorial and lieutenant governor candidates combined. So we need to make sure that we understand how that interstate commerce is working, that we're fighting for our Utah companies, that we're not mailing it in, so to speak, that we're standing up for our rights and we're asserting our rights, and that we're an active player. That's number one. Number two is we need to continue to find partners around on the coast that will export our coal and other minerals and oil, things that we're producing here in the state of Utah. I know Oakland, there was a big situation there. I know the court case is just wrapping up there. I think Utah can continue to be successful, but we need to make sure that we're going to those locations and we're identifying people who want to do business with the state of Utah, who want to participate with us, and that we're asserting our rights all of the time. We need somebody that understands these industries, and I want to learn more and more about them so that I can articulate the messages correctly, and as governor, go to those locations and fight for Utah to make sure that our Utah companies have an outlet for the goods that they're producing. Without that, we're going to really struggle. And I can tell you, as I've traveled around the state, they're really worried about that. We're energy rich, but if we don't have the ability to sell those goods in the open market, especially to foreign countries, then we're going to struggle. So we've got to have a governor that understands that, that's passionate about it, and that will go and create those relationships and be involved in that fight. And it will be a fight.
So there have been many discussions about economic development and corporate recruitment incentives during this campaign. However, these incentives are not available to natural resource operations at all, and homegrown industrial operations also generally don't qualify unless they threaten to move out of state. So what would you do? What would your approach be to ensuring that natural resource operations and homegrown industries can qualify for the same kind of incentives as a Facebook or Amazon?
Yeah, I think, again, back to that, we have 29 counties in the state. We've seen 4 counties where all the economic incentives, job growth, population growth have been shoehorned into just 4 counties out of 29. The proper role of government is really the infrastructure side. So we get the roads, we get the rail, we get the water. Water's a tough one across federal lands. We get those things, and we make those communities able to enhance their existing markets, but also be a magnet for more markets like manufacturing. I think it's the most powerful thing our state can do to help our local businesses, and really it's a role of economic development that I think only the state can do. As far as incentives, we're not going to incentivize the continued shoehorning of businesses for the sake of businesses in just 4 counties. One of the unintended consequences is if you do it just on jobs, which is what the Governor's Office of Economic Development has done, if you're going to incentivize just on job growth, any corporate expansion or relocation is going to stare where the populations are the highest. And so it just perpetuates itself. So we have to get out of that mindset. We can't be so myopic in what those incentives look like. And we have to, again, if the University of Utah is saying we're going to double in population by 2050, we got over 3 million people in the state now. There is no human way we're putting 80% of 6.5 million people in the state of Utah in just 4 counties. And so whatever we've done. But moving forward, we've got to see that investment and incentives apply to the rest of the state.
Well, who's creating jobs, number one, and who's bringing value to the state, number two? They're kind of intertwined. But I think the days of incentives are largely gone. And I say that because while as governor, I created a thing called GOED, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and therein were the incentives offices. We had a really hard time recruiting people to the state some years ago. And we were up against other states who were providing way more in the way of incentives. And we wanted ours to be performance-based, so they weren't giveaways, they're basically earned over time. And We're to a point now where our market can be marketed as such a unique safe haven, with other markets around us failing or not doing so well. I think the market will speak for itself going forward. And I'm not at all convinced that the traditional offerings are going to have to be part of it, part of the deal like they had to be before. They were a standard part of it before. We couldn't get anybody's door. I think the whole dynamic has changed. So if you stop to think that labor and capital and manufacturing will be moving, migrating, like no time since World War II in the next couple of years, and I do believe this to be the case, nationally and globally, I think with a little leadership and a little vision about what we want to be and what we can be, we can direct a lot of that our way. No incentives necessarily required. It's going to be moving, and it's going to be looking, as capital always does, as manufacturing always does, for a safe haven where it can do what it needs to do to service its markets without disruption. And there's been way too much disruption over the last year. So with all of that up for grabs, I think we are in a really, really preferred position in terms of winning some really good economic development opportunities. Seeing our own nurtured, because that's what we do best first and foremost, those who are here, those who are innovating, those who are producing, first and foremost, but we'll get some from the outside too, maybe even some broken up supply chains that don't want to exist somewhere else because the trust factor has disappeared totally.
Yeah, isn't it frustrating? I got to be honest, this has been frustrating for me. I'm a Utah business owner, and I've watched our tax dollars go to incentivize companies to come here while local homegrown companies go without, so to speak. And I don't think it's fair. I think GOAD had a proper role when it was organized 15 years ago. I think it largely accomplished its mission. As governor, I will look at GOAD. GOAD will be completely redefined. I think for me it's gotten bloated, and I think it's beyond its original mission. And that's what government tends to do. It has mission creep, and it just tends to get bigger, and it tends to try to do more. I would rather take that money and either incentivize the growth of our local companies, as I stated earlier, with reskilling and retraining our workforce, and or taking the money and lowering the rate across the board for everyone to participate. But I've said, and I'm one of the only candidates that hasn't said, hey, I'll just do away with GOAD. I believe that there's a role for incentives from time to time, that there is a proper role. If we need to compete for high-skilled jobs, we need to do that. But more than anything, we need those economic incentives on the table for rural Utah and for the industries that we're talking about today and that you represent. Because without those incentives, they're going to really struggle to maintain their success. And that's going to really disproportionately hurt rural Utah. And I've said this in the campaign, but rural Utah's been left behind. There are at least 22 counties and maybe more that never came out of the last recession. And there needs to be a strong focus paid attention to the industries that are driving those local economies, and they're different. Rural Utah has many, many different things, right? It's not just one thing, but we need to have a strategic plan for every rural community in the state. And the degree to which they want the state government's assistance and help, they'll have it under a Governor Wright. If they don't, we're not going to go force ourselves on them or force them to be involved in state government if they don't want to be. But I will tell you, they all want it. They want assistance of state government. And so we've got to have a plan for each of those rural communities and say, what incentives is there a proper role for the state to have some incentives to help those economies grow, to help the businesses that are already there, some of which are really struggling. I mean, they really are, and I've been in them, and it's heartbreaking to watch. And I've said this, but 80% of our population now lives in 4 counties along the Wasatch Front. You know, the other 25 counties are just out there. And I think if the people along the Wasatch Front knew the challenges and the struggles in rural Utah, they'd be uncomfortable with it and they would want to do something about it. So I'm going to be the rural Utah governor, even though I am from the Wasatch Front, because I'm passionate about those people and the industries that made those economies great. And we've got to get out there and connect with them, understand them. I want to do that. The people there know what needs to happen, and then we need to support them to make sure that they don't struggle and or die. We don't need more economic incentives for companies along the Wasatch Front. We really don't. I'm not opposed to it. If there's high-skilled, high-paying jobs and we want them, I'm not closing the door. I've been careful about that. But by and large, we need to make sure the incentives are for local homegrown companies, especially during the pandemic, and that we're looking at rural Utah in a fair way so that we can spread our population out and we can support all Utahns in the state of, all Utahns, no matter what county they live in. Yeah.
Well, when I'm one of those, by the way, that was pushing back on incentives very early, and I feel very strongly about it. I think it's a mistake to incentivize companies to come here who are going to come anyway. I think it's a mistake to incentivize companies when you have unemployment at 2.5%, when they're, the existing companies can't get the workforce they need. And I think it's a mistake to incentivize companies from outside at the expense of companies inside the state, and so I proposed many changes to our current set of incentives, and I especially focusing on rural Utah, and that's where we get left out. Most of the incentives that come in the state come to the Wasatch Front, and yet we have high unemployment. We have 4 counties in the state that have been in a recession since the Great Recession. They never saw the recession end. We should be focusing on those homegrown companies, those homegrown opportunities to expand, and we can do that. It's a simple change. It's a change that should vary based on the unemployment that we see in the state. Obviously, unemployment at 9% is very different than 2%, and it should be nimble, should be able to fluctuate, and should certainly benefit the people of rural Utah, and that's one of the changes that will do that.
Thank you. So those are the standard questions that we've had for all the candidates, and then we've got a couple of specific questions for you, and then we'll give you a chance to sort of give your closing pitch. So the first question, at a UCARE gala a few months ago, you stated that as governor you would commit Utah to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And that's 15 years before even California plans to be carbon neutral. So first, are you still committed to that goal, and how would you accomplish it without severely damaging Utah's energy producers and other heavy industries?
Well, you're not going to damage the economy, number one. Number two, you're not a leader unless you throw out stretch goals. Every CEO I've worked with, every leader I've been around, and in my own years as leading organizations, you throw things out there. You might reach it, you might not, but you got to start the discussion at some point. And most politicians don't, because they don't dare offer anything that might carry risk or become controversial. That's not what I am. And while you might not get there, it starts a conversation, and you learn the good and the bad, and what's doable and what's not doable. And I've been around too much manufacturing in my career. I've seen what the new tier diesel engines are producing in terms of clean output. I've seen what our major auto OEMs are producing, because I've helped to manage those kinds of companies. And we're moving in a direction that speaks to cleaner air, generally. So, throw a goal out there, which I did, and get people talking. I don't regret that at all.
So those were the general questions we had for all the candidates. Now we've got a couple for you specifically. So you've campaigned as an outsider, and you've highlighted your business experience, but most CEOs don't have a board of directors with 104 members like you would have at the legislature if you're elected. So what will be your approach to applying your business experience while still dealing with the realities of government, especially the fact that you won't be the only boss?
Yeah, see, this is why I'm the perfect candidate for governor. If you don't believe me, Brian, just ask me, right? The reason that I'm perfect is because, in addition to being the outsider and having the business executive experience that I have, for those same 12 years, I've been the volunteer chairman of the Utah Republican Party, and I've volunteered on the Republican National Committee. So I've helped all these legislators in their races. I know who they are. I know their areas. I know a lot of their families. I know that this isn't a business where the CEO just comes in and does whatever he says. And that's not how I run my business anyway. So collaborating, listening, and working together is not foreign to me. It actually is a huge advantage to have an outsider that's ready to tackle some of these challenges, because you don't have all the past baggage. When you're in politics for a long time, like my 3 opponents, you've made votes. You've taken hard positions. You've taken money from special interest groups, right? You've kind of sealed yourself into positions that make it hard to sit down with other entities and have a conversation. I don't have any of that. But at the same time, I know the players and I know how state government works. So I'm not coming as an outsider that doesn't understand the budget process or how local and city and state government collaborate and work together. I have all of those elements, but I bring the outside perspective. So it's the perfect pairing to help Utah move forward.
Great. So those are our standard questions we're asking all the candidates. We've got a couple of specific questions for you. One's actually a good follow-up to what we were just talking about. So you often speak of legislators being disinterested in anything south of the Payson-Dixon line. However, nearly all of the economic development incentives, as you just mentioned, that have been awarded during the Herbert administration, and nearly all the infrastructure spending has gone to projects on the Wasatch Front. So how would you change that in a Cox administration?
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways to change it. I've also often lamented that I'm the only person in the room from rural Utah when big decisions are being made. And then I wonder what happens when I'm not in the room. And usually that means there's no one representing rural Utah in those rooms. And it's not that they don't care about us, it's just that they often forget us or don't understand how different life is in rural Utah versus the Wasatch Front. And so there's a couple things that we can do differently. One of those is that I've committed to having a geographically diverse cabinet, making sure that we have representation. We have amazing people, brilliant, smart, talented, hardworking people all across this state. They often don't get opportunities to serve in these capacities because they're out of sight, out of mind. They're at a distance, and so I'm someone who can bring those people together. I have also said that I will have a rural chief of staff. Together with my chief of staff, we'll have two people, one who can always represent those rural interests and help us when we're making those decisions. And finally, I mentioned this before, but we just have to restructure our incentive programs in this state. They should be weighted based on opportunity and need. And so by weighting those, we can give a better incentive for someone to locate off the Wasatch Front. That does a couple things. One, of course, it benefits people in rural Utah. Helps with jobs, but two, it helps with the growth that's happening on the Wasatch Front. When I talk to people on the Wasatch Front, they're not concerned about more jobs coming here. That's the last concern they have. They're concerned about the price of housing. They're concerned about bad air. They're concerned about traffic. And so, if we're giving away big incentives and looking at the industry again, we just shouldn't be incentivizing data centers. They're very resource intensive, they don't create a lot of jobs, and they're probably coming anyway. So let's focus on those areas where we can do better and where we will help a population who needs it more, and let's balance those needs in a way that benefits.
So during this campaign, you promoted yourself as the candidate who's most concerned about rural Utah, and you've been critical of the Herbert administration and its record on rural issues. However, when you were in the legislature and controlling the purse strings, Utah saw nearly all its economic development incentives and transportation spending be awarded to projects on the Wasatch Front. So first of all, why didn't you use your influence to direct more of that money to rural Utah and to traditional industries, and how would you do things differently if you were elected governor?
So first, I love the questions like this. So when I was on the clock, we did work on these things. I worked with our rural lawmakers, making sure that the federal government doesn't encumber more roads, more land. We pushed back on that in even some historic ways. But the premise of your question is correct. Why hasn't rural Utah seen more political capital, more political attention? And I've even said this in town halls in Richfield and other places. When 80% of Utah's population lives in 4 counties, they have the votes. They have the political power. That's the way it's always been. And why? And so when you have a candidate for governor coming through your town, the best that you're asking is don't forget about us. Why it's different in 2020, but you need a governor that will connect the dots, is that as I meet with people in the 4 counties at 80% of the population and jobs that we all have here, we're full. We've grown. The congestion failure is getting worse every day. The quality of life is getting worse every day. The interests of the people that 80% of the people of Utah in 4 counties now align with rural Utah, where their interests are the same, where they want a relief valve. They want to see economic activity, opportunity happen outside of the 4 counties because people in the state of Utah are feeling it now. So now instead of just 20% of the population wondering why they don't have a stronger say, 80% of the population are the cheerleaders, supporters, and advocates that the 20% of Utah's population have that chance to grow and see that economic opportunity. We've not had that atmosphere or kind of that sentiment that's been brewing and getting stronger until now. But you're going to need a governor who can connect those dots broadly with the people. It's a unique relationship you have as governor with the people of Utah, and that's what you get with me.
And then you've talked a lot about making state government more efficient, which is clearly a worthy goal. However, heavy industries are highly regulated, and uncertainty or dysfunction in a regulatory agency can quickly impede our work. So what would be your approach to improving regulatory agencies without changing them so rapidly or drastically that you create problems for regulated industries?
Yeah, well, heavy industry is a perfect example of why you need to sit down the shareholders, right? I don't pretend to be the candidate, nor will I pretend to be the governor that has all the answers. I believe the best leader is one that's not threatened by people who know more than they know, that's willing to listen to the different sides and is willing to collaborate. This is all of our Utah, right? It's not one person making the decision for everyone. It's one person saying, I will sit everybody down and we'll make the best decision for all Utahns going forward. And there's so much to know, there's so much to learn, and there's so many intricacies. The last thing we want to do is go in and disrupt an industry in the name of trying to make it more efficient. So I want to collaborate, I want to work with people, I want to listen to them, and any candidate that comes in here and tells you they have the answers in any of these things just isn't being straightforward with you. We need people that are willing to, number one, work hard and put in the time, that two, have the energy, and three, are not threatened by listening and collaborating and saying, what can we do to make you more competitive? Where is the regulation that's holding you back? Where is the regulation that is good, that is protecting? Because there is a proper role for that, right? It's not all about just deregulating it. That's an important part, but it's about working together to make industries more competitive. And if you're not constantly working on that and constantly improving those things, then you're falling further and further behind. And I can't think of any industries more worthy of sitting down at the table that are more important to the overall success of Utah than the ones that we're talking about today. So we need somebody that has the energy, the enthusiasm, the experience, but also the desire to sit down and really make a difference, because it won't just happen on its own. And the most dangerous day, and in a company, a person, or a state's cycle, the most dangerous day is the day you have success. I know that as a business owner, because once you have success, cheerleading can replace leadership. You can start patting each other on the back. You can start thinking that that's just your place. Being at the top is just where you are. But once you get complacent and you start taking those things for granted, you start that slow slide. And the problem with the slide is you don't realize you've slid out of the top spot until it's too late. And so we have to get up every day and say, the reason Utah is the greatest state and has been on top is we've been willing to pay the price. And so let's wake up every day and earn that victory. And the way you earn it is by sitting down with industry leaders, listening to them, and then working to make their industries more competitive, more efficient, and better. And you do it deliberately, you do it thoughtfully, and you do it carefully so you don't have those unintended consequences that you talked about.
So in a column published at the beginning of Governor Herbert's current term, Robert Gerke of the Salt Lake Tribune wrote that Gary Herbert is essentially being handed the keys to a souped-up monster truck. He can take this thing barreling around anywhere he wants to, but so far he only seems interested in taking it out of the garage to run the same mundane errands that he has for the past 7.5 years, like a trip to the grocery for boring stuff like milk and maybe kale. So what would you do differently with Utah's monster truck than your current boss?
Well, I'm going to push back on anything that Robert Gerke writes. We don't take our marching orders from the Salt Lake Tribune for obvious reasons. And if boring means creating more jobs per capita than any state in the nation over the last 10 years, having the most diverse economy in the nation, leading the nation as the best state for business 6 out of the last 9 years, I'll take that boring any day. And by the way, so would any other governor in this country that would trade places with us in a heartbeat. All of that being said, I think the things that we've talked about now, that focus on rural and on the industries that are so important to rural is something that I don't just think about as a way to pander to voters. I feel it. It's who I am. I mean, my uncles were truck drivers for coal companies. I have relatives right now that are working in extractive industries. My son is working construction this summer, and that's who we are. I come from a blue-collar background, a rural area, and that informs my being. It informs the decisions that I make, and so that's certainly, I think something that will be different. It's a difference in emphasis, and it's going to make a huge impact on the people who desperately need it in rural Utah.
So final question.
I didn't go faster.
So your campaign slogan is "Get It Done." As governor, you would still have to convince a majority of our 104 legislatures to buy into your vision in order to get anything done. And some might argue that you have fewer tools to force their hand as governor than you did when you were speaker. So how would you approach that challenge if you were elected?
Yeah, so it is anathema to me to make decisions out of fear. And as speaker, it wasn't a heavy hand or forcing anything. And if you have 75 members of the House and 63 are Republican, which was our caucus when I was speaker, you don't force that. That would be more like herding cats in terms of the how many Republicans and how different the districts are. It was our formula that good information drove good decisions. We took the hard issues on because of that. We didn't let fear, or did our best to try and not let fear dictate our decision making. As governor, these are colleagues I've worked with before, many of them. We would use that same eye to good information driving good decisions. And when we do that, and we ignore the special interest groups and the liberal media that attack. And there are people that don't want to see the state grow. They wake up every day trying to not see that happen. But if we can take that on, I'm absolutely positive that formula still works in the legislature. And again, we need a governor that can work with the legislature in that vein.
And you've highlighted your experience with China and with international trade in your campaign. What would be your plans to increase Utah's access to international markets for its commodities, as we talked about earlier, and manufactured goods, and also reshoring some of the supply chain capacity that we've lost over the years?
When I was governor last time, because what I had done before was a combination of half my career in business, in manufacturing mostly, and half in public service. I'd been U.S. trade rep before I was elected governor before. And I knew these markets because I'd negotiated some of the market access agreements, with the big markets in Asia, for example. So we took Utah companies to some of those markets, particularly agriculture, and they found new export opportunities. Exporting will be a big way of life for us. If we're going to be a manufacturing giant, and if we're going to look at energy as a product that we can be competitive in, which we are and will, we need export markets. And so I'll want to continue to make sure that we can access markets that I understand very well. I've lived in these markets, I've negotiated in these markets, I've helped to run businesses in these markets, and I can help bring that to our state. Supply chains are going to be disrupted. So a Caterpillar supply chain is harder to disrupt. A Ford assembly line is harder to disrupt. But there are others, particularly research and development, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, pharmaceutical devices and products, that will be disrupted because we've been too top heavy in one market, namely China. And the trust factor is gone. And they're going to be looking for places to consider as alternatives for their R&D and for their manufacturing. And I think we have hundreds of billions of dollars in business up for grabs, and it's going to go somewhere. And I want to help direct some of it here that's in line with our workforce, our training capabilities, our universities that bring salaries that are 20% higher than what we would traditionally get. I look to the years ahead and I see the disruption as bringing us enormous opportunity. I like it. I've never been so optimistic about what this state can achieve from an economic development standpoint. And part of it will be other markets being disrupted, supply chains that decide to take components out and do work elsewhere. And I think we're perfectly situated to pick up some of that business.
So we just want to give you another minute to give your final pitch to the folks that are working in Utah's heavy industries. Again, our associations represent tens of thousands of employees that are in these amazing industries that contribute and create wealth for the state. And just want to give you a chance to give them your final pitch as to why they should vote for Spencer Cox for governor.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my passion, my insights, my history with these industries. heavy industry is the forgotten industries in the state. It's so often, again, we talk about the new and the shiny when it's the steady and the old. It's been here for forever, and it's going to be here for a long time to come. And again, as the only candidate who lives off the Wasatch Front, I think I have a unique understanding into how this impacts our economy, but more important than our economy, how it impacts individuals. And that's what makes me different. And so over the next 4 years, I think we have a window to make sure that we put protections into place for these industries in a way that will bless generations to come. We could go the other way, as we've seen some other states do, and we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I'm the candidate that will assure people that that will not happen. So I look forward to serving. I look forward to working with you and others over the next 4 years to make sure that Utah is the state for heavy industry, and we can compete with anyone in the world because we have the resources, and better yet, we have the people here to make that happen.
And so what's your final pitch now for why workers in Utah's heavy industry should vote for Greg Hughes for governor?
Look, the way I grew up, my mother's a single mother. I grew up in a working blue-collar town. I have that empathy and that understanding. I said when I announced my candidacy in Dee's Automotive in a service bay, I'm here for the little guy and the little gal, for the everyday working people of our state. That's who I feel I am. And I've been lucky enough to live in a country and a state where I've been able to make my own way. Not equal outcomes, but equal opportunity. You get a governor in me that has that on his mind, that perspective. Our meetings have been great, our town halls and local leader lunches and breakfasts, over 85 meetings we've been able to hold since January. I had that period where it was like, it was a bad James Bond movie, I had to stay in my house, but after that, we've moved out, and May we started again. So I have that empathy. I think empathy is a powerful tool for leadership, and I have a track record of having accomplished hard public policy and moving the needle, leaving the place better than we found it. That's what you get with me as governor, and I think that's what the working people of our state deserve.
So now we just want to give you an opportunity. Again, we're here representing a lot of Utah's heavy industries, Utah Mining Association, Utah Petroleum Association, Utah Manufacturers Association, and the Associated General Contractors. So what is your pitch as to why the workers in these heavy industries should vote for Jon Huntsman for governor?
I love manufacturing, and I'm no doubt the only candidate who knows anything about manufacturing. It's part of my life. Half my life has been in private industry, the other half has been in public service. And my private industry has taken me from Huntsman Corporation, which is a manufacturing company in differentiated specialty chemicals, my brother now runs, all the way to Caterpillar, Ford, Chevron, some of the great manufacturing giants in this country. And I understand their businesses. I understand our businesses here from a manufacturing standpoint. The next 10 years will be the most important in, I think, our state's history. And the decisions made on how we will grow and evolve and develop from an economy standpoint, from a training standpoint, how we take advantage of a global economy that's so severely disrupted and bring opportunities a whole lot for rural parts of our state, because that's where people will choose to go because of quality of life and affordability. I think we just have an enormously powerful opportunity with the right kind of leadership, the right governor, to do everything I tried to do before, in lighting the fuse for economic growth and expansion. I want to do it all over again. We just need a 2.0.
And we want to give you an opportunity just to give your final pitch. Why should the workers in Utah's heavy industries that are represented here today, why should they vote for Thomas Wright as governor?
Because I have all of the attributes that I just outlined. I believe in a country where our founding fathers set up the ability for any citizen to step up and to run and to be a part of the solution and offer themselves for public service. I personally don't believe public service should be a career. And I think sometimes politicians get in and they're well-intentioned and they're good people, but they get in and they stay too long and it becomes a career pathway for them. This is not my career pathway. I just want to give back to the state that's given me so much. This race really isn't about me. It's about the state of Utah, and it's about the many pressing challenges that we see and simultaneously addressing those while building on all the successes that we have had. And we've had a lot of successes because of our great citizens. So if you believe in citizen government and that anybody can run, and anybody can win, then I'm the candidate for you. If you're into the, the step up the ladder and the career politics and the professional politicism of these jobs, then you have 3 great people that have spent a lot of time in government and they have a lot of experience. But I believe that the best ideas come from the outside and that we can build on the successes we have while simultaneously having new ideas. But I just think it's time for a new direction in a lot of the agencies of state government. And I'll just close by saying there's 20,000 state employees and there's $20 billion in our state budget. And what happens when the same people are in for a really long time is you get the same people in those agencies, and they're great people, and I don't want to disrupt their lives, but turnover is healthy and turnover is good. And if we take for granted that we're going to always be the #1 state and that it's just our right, and we slide into that place of complacency that I talked about, I believe we'll wake up one day and see that we missed a lot of opportunities to press forward and to continue to set the bar for the rest of the states in the country.